Oh, really? I think we went right through it.
Before anybody leaves, I just want to say, what I said in a comment to Paul's paper, which is I found it a very enlightening and useful paper. This is despite my many tiny and also kind of major substantive comments. But I just wanted to give Paul a lot of credit for a phenomenally increased and much more useful paper than the previous version.
Thank you.
I really like the introduction too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyone who is totally against nuclear power would want to read more after reading the introduction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, yeah, I don't know. Paul, do you want to, yeah, I guess there was some idea that maybe we should postpone this entirely or just.
I'm okay either way.
I'm, you know, if people are, I don't know who's going to be.
You mentioned discussing Amy's linked thing. Was that something we could do now?
We could.
You said that you thought that would be a half hour.
And then
So that would fit in now.
I have to leave.
Oh, that's right. Amy's not here. Right? So,
even better.
Yeah, then we could really.
Right, and Amy and I did that together, but really Amy should be here to guide.
Everybody's freezing, so I don't know if I'm missing something. But I have to leave anyway, so I'll catch you later. Everyone's frozen. Bye.
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 Amy is leaving to deal with local, as in tiny neighborhood, significant environmental issues.
Hello, that's pretty important.
So who is gonna be able to stay on, you know, at least for another half hour? Okay, I guess we have enough folks to continue.
Okay.
All right, yeah. I will.
Okay.
Record it and get started. And
okay.
Okay.
I was going to need a whole other session, minimal. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
no,
gonna...
the main thing was just to get me to get through a first draft completely, which I think maybe as of this morning I've mostly done. If you could make that like 200% or something, or 150 at least.
Paul, do you want to have it on your screen instead so you can control the scrolling?
I could try that.
You want to do? I mean, I could do that. Sure.
Okay.
Just because if you're going to be talking about it, it might be easier if you're doing the scrolling.
Share screen, desktop 2. Well, let's see.
Larry, where are those weavings from? Are they from Turkey?
Let's see. The one
with the flowers.
The one with the flowers we bought in Istanbul from a Syrian immigrant.
I knew it. Yeah, because we bought some things like that from Turkey too.
Right. And
from Istanbul. Yeah.
The one in the middle is probably from Guatemala or Mexico, like in the 70s.
I've been to Guatemala.
The other one, the long one on this side of me, is probably from Cambodia, most likely. It's a little sad when we can't remember. We've got so many artifacts from around the world, but Cambodia is a good guess.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Good. Okay. So yeah, Arnie suggested a table of contents. I'll agree to that. Actually, my thinking was once it's deemed complete that I'll just make an executive summary of several pages. So there's actually a readable version instead of just the encyclopedic version.
But the table of contents in any case would be good.
Yeah, I'll do a table. Yeah, I will do a table of contents. I think that's good. I guess I'll come to Larry's lengthy comments when they're there. Right. Thank you for the extensive grammatical and punctuational advice, Larry. Although we do seem to agree on disagree on capitalizations.
That's because you studied so much German.
That's right. I think that's it. I just thought, yeah, but you know.
Non-proper nouns in English.
Rosenberg sounds pretty German to me. Yeah. So yeah, the issue of nuclear proliferation. So I could include that and then add another paragraph discussing it later. To my mind, it was seen as a big issue, but what we've discovered is the proliferation happens anyway, and it's not availability of uranium and plutonium that are the big issues. Really, the technical issue now is the centrifugation in order to get the purities, and which is what the issue is now in Iran. And actually, was the big breakthroughs that got Pakistan and North Korea. I mean, none of them. It wasn't the French reprocessing fuel that led to any of the proliferation. It was other technical issues. But I could discuss that and
Well, I just
include
think
nuclear, or I could just avoid the whole thing. So
I think it's worth having a paragraph on it because
okay, I'll do
enough
that.
people who might say, well, okay, you've answered my waste and safety questions, but what about proliferation?
Okay, yeah,
So
okay. Then I'll
anticipate.
add that paragraph then later, and I'll agree. So I'll add that here.
Yeah, I did like the introduction here too.
Oh, thank
Very
you.
good.
Am I adding an and? Okay.
I had some issues. I sent Paul some comments on a red line.
Okay.
And I had some
On this part?
yeah, and I had some concerns in the second paragraph where
Okay.
I think it's a little too positive. So,
Okay.
for example, I would say on the second line of the second paragraph, not to say that they're inherently safe, because you don't know yet really, but that are
Right.
designed to be inherently safer. So we don't have a good track record yet, and
Yeah.
and also they're much cheaper to build and to bring online. Now, you got my notes.
Well, I could say I think designed to be inherently safe is a fair way of saying it, right? Or safer, if you prefer. Yeah.
And then I put after safer, I said, and are simpler, smaller, much cheaper to build and to bring online than in the past.
And to bring online. Okay, I'll agree with that too.
'Cause
Okay, I'll
again,
look at that. I can change that.
shorter timeframe.
Does online include maintenance?
Well, yeah.
And are simpler, smaller, and much cheaper to build and to bring online than in the past.
Mhm.
Right.
That's
But what do you mean by online? Does that include maintenance?
to operate. Once you
To
put
get-
the shovel in the ground, between the shovel in the ground and turning on the start key,
Right.
Yeah.
it's a shorter period than you have currently in larger nuclear reactors.
Right.
But maintenance is actually another advantage, especially for the smaller ones.
Right.
And means, in fact, the micros are just set up. You don't do any maintenance. You
Right,
just
it's
drop
fun.
it where you want it, and then 20 years later, you pick it up and do
Plug in
something with
another
it.
one.
And plug in another one. Yeah. So they're very much plug and play.
Fusion reactors being built at MIT is to have it be a sort of a plug-in on the existing grid
Right.
when it comes to fruition.
I guess where I realize I've really become overly optimistic is that there's not as much as I thought in terms of them being built. I mean, they're just now starting to build them, so it'll be a few years before we really know that these are everything they promise to be.
Are any of the designs breeder reactors, by the way, or are they just straight non-breeders?
I'm not sure. They are used to. There are some which are the fast reactors, which can use the bridge fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to think. Do fast reactors breed themselves? So I'm not clear. I'm not sure at the moment. I mean, I know they're made to work with breeders. Okay, if not to be breeders themselves.
In terms of the next sentence, you use the word renewable. I tend to favor the word non-emitting because renewable right now is politically.
Well, there is a for waste reduction.
Renewable gas, you got renewable other things which are fossil fuel based.
Yeah, but the thing is that I mean that's the distinction, right? So I use clean and renewable to make the distinction, but non-emitting would
Non-emitting is
it's
we've got
the
those
same as clean.
statutes in Massachusetts that use that non-emitting phrase.
But the point here is though there are people that are pushing for renewable, and by that are leaving out both hydro and nuclear.
But
So
renewable,
hydro and nuclear are non-emitting, so I have to make that distinction.
And solar is non-emitting, wind is non-emitting,
Right.
and renewable gas is emitting, and biomass is emitting. So
Right.
that's the
Oh,
distinction.
I see. So to make
Biomass renewable, which it really
Yeah.
is not.
I think
right.
renewable is confusing when you consider how else it's used.
But yeah, but non-emitting includes nuclear, so that's not right.
And isn't
So
renewable,
you're saying for something more restrictive than renewable, some term
Yeah,
that
I'm looking
would.
for something more. I
Yeah,
don't-
see, non-emitting is actually broader in many ways. It's both, right?
Yeah,
So we need a Venn diagram to figure out.
How about saying non-carbon emitting?
yeah,
well, I thought the
No, that's
intent
still-
there was, you could, I
I
mean,
could
normally it's,
specifically say, so you want something that just describes solar and wind.
yeah, so you
I could
usually,
just put that parenthetically.
yeah, so I would say the adoption of intermittent renewable energy, e.g., or usually people say such as solar and wind, where
Mhm.
solar and wind are really, except,
So if I said intermittent here,
yeah.
and then intermittent.
I'll take issue with the word intermittent later, but that's okay.
Okay. And then
Oh, okay.
parenthetically, put solar.
yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's
I have to learn how to
ENT at the
spell.
end of intermittent.
Yeah.
Or say of clean energy, comma, such as solar and wind, comma, something like that. Then you raise the whole issue of intermittency, which I don't think you want to raise at this time of your paper.
That's true. Yeah, I want to get through things initially. We can address those later, I guess.
Mhm. And I think in the next line, you say dispatchable energy. I would say dispatchable baseline energy. I think that's what you're looking at.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, there are some that, I mean, that for the micro reactors, they're actually
Yeah.
talking that they can be more peak, or at least follow the right, that they can be turned, they can be ramped up and down. Whereas a baseline, you think of it as steady.
Yeah, I picked that up just after reading it a little bit. I came back and put the baseline in because that seemed to where your article was going in terms of establishing a baseline.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that those issues can be addressed like in the penultimate section, where I'm really addressing the type. So I can go into that deeper then,
Mhm.
and we can make these distinctions.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
At
wanna-
this point, I want to kind
Right.
of just get through the basic ideas to have an overview.
Right.
And just another comment, the last two lines, you say nuclear energy is often the best candidate to consider, best candidate. I tend to back away and say is an appropriate candidate to consider for that production. Since we're still in the incipient development stage of employing it. Instead of saying best, is an appropriate candidate to consider for that production.
I don't know. I think best makes sense. It has a lot of advantages.
Yeah, it does, and
It's
you
not
got
just another, I mean, it's in its own category.
My sense is you put the word in best, people are going to take issue with it right away. If you say appropriate, then they'll keep their mind open and continue reading.
You could say is often in some people's views the best candidate.
Mhm.
Yeah, I tried to I tried to not use weasel words here, right? I tried to be strong, actually.
Right.
Maybe I tried to never be inappropriately strong, but I did try to want to be strong.
Yeah.
You could say,
If you-
good. Following
Yeah.
on with your initial quote, don't let the
right.
Good.
best be the enemy of the good.
There's a powerful candidate for that.
I mean, I have often. I mean,
Strong candidate.
does that not qualify it?
Yeah, strong candidate.
Is often a strong candidate if you feel it's
Yeah.
better.
No, yeah.
I feel often qualifies.
Yeah.
It'll be quiet and is often the best candidate, or can be the best candidate.
Yeah.
Maybe,
It's still,
I think it's
yeah,
fine.
I really don't want to be weaselly about it. Yeah.
Well, I think that-
to me often softens it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is often the best candidate. I think that's
Yeah.
fair. I
I
don't
think
think
it's
that's a
good.
lie.
Yeah.
You know, anyway, we could be looking at this many times. So you can,
Well, it's not-
we can come back to that.
Or say often the appropriate candidate. That covers all of it because it really
It's
applies
often the
to
appropriate. Okay.
often the appropriate.
It's often the appropriate. Okay, I'm okay with that. That sound okay to other people?
yeah, I think Ed's point that you don't, you're probably speaking to a number of folks who.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you
Have-
don't want to put people off either way. So I didn't want to be,
Right.
out there, because that gives people a chance to immediately reject you. But I didn't want to, my first versions were very full of qualifications and softness. And I decided, it really needs to be said more directly, because
Right.
you can undermine yourself too much, right?
Yeah,
You're your own pendulum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
And my comments are pretty much, you've got my red line.
Yeah, I'll go through your thing, okay? And but if there's ones you want to specifically bring up, go ahead. Oh, so Larry, could you send me this a link to the Princeton?
Yeah, so what this Princeton study, you can see the comment there where I started out the recent Princeton study. It was a study led by a few people at Princeton. One of them is Jesse Jenkins, you may have heard of, a recent MIT grad who's now an assistant professor at Princeton. I think it's called the Net Zero America Study. And they came up with 5 different scenarios for getting to net zero, only one of which calls for a major increase in nuclear power. Most of them call for small increases. They explicitly call for not getting rid of existing useful nuclear power plants that are still within their useful lives.
Okay.
But it's a very mainstream, I think, credible study which says maybe we don't need nuclear at all.
Okay.
They may not be right, but you
No,
quote.
that's a reasonable point of view. I think that's
Right,
worth
I will send you the
acknowledging.
link. There's a lot about it, but to the actual study, I'll send you a link. And then along the same lines, if you scroll down a bit, I made another comment where it says for a sense of the scale of this country, that one, yeah. So I went back to something I quoted once before from Physics Today, pointing out the vast solar and wind resources in the US, which of course you can't just say, okay, that's enough, because there's issues of timing, which means you need batteries, and issues of transmission, so you need HVDC lines. But the scale of what's potentially available again draws into question in my mind, do we really need nuclear, or how much do we need? So this is not definitive, but these 2 comments take away, in my view, from the sense that nuclear is absolutely necessary.
Okay. Yeah, so I pointed out that, so I think there's a place I could address that. So I guess my overall conclusions are, A, sort of as you said, that we shouldn't be, well, A, I just like people take a fresh look. B, that it does seem dangerous to be getting rid of what we have.
Yeah.
And 3, to be open to increasing where it makes sense. But I do think, there are arguments that we don't need to increase, but we need to look at that in a fair way. And one of those, which I probably just added later, I'm not sure if people saw it, and that's that, yeah, go ahead and really overbuild the wind and the solar. Doesn't matter if they're intermittent if you have enough of it. Go ahead and really overbuild it 6-fold, whatever. And then you have all this free electricity, and that they'll always find uses for that. We can then have desalination. We can start doing, pulling carbon out of the air if you have free electricity. That you can use it for industrial processes, that we can start using it for heat and everything else. And so that is a point of view. So I added that, and you know, people can decide that's crazy or if that makes sense, but that would be an argument for why you don't need nuclear. So I can discuss things in that part, okay, and add in whether the grid, whether it makes sense that we don't need to add, because if we can just distribute, the intermittency can be solved if there's, or at least ameliorated if there's wide enough connections between energies, right? That they can offset each other.
Just let me add one thing that goes in the opposite direction of what I just said.
Okay.
Despite what I just said, I do favor support for research on advanced nuclear, because
Yeah.
despite the fact that wind and solar might be able to do everything, that's far from a certain thing. And we ought to hedge our bets by trying out advanced nuclear.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it does have its uses.
I also, I worry about relying too much on storage. That, you know, if you end up having a prolonged period of time where just maybe 100-year event where there's just no wind or solar for a while, to be able to actually generate power is important.
Mm-hmm. Plus, we're going to get into troubles on these rare earth minerals at some point, right? Especially if cars are requiring them. And I mean, batteries, there's already not enough batteries just for cars, and then to, you know, add on these giant storage things that are competing, then you're fighting each other.
Right.
Yes, Betty.
Yeah, you're raising costs.
One of the things that I think doesn't get identified is the problem with transmission lines. I mean, as I watched it play out, you know, with Hydro-Quebec and the transmission line problem in Maine, yeah, that's just a little teeny tiny transmission line.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, it is a knockdown, drag out. It's been going on for years. It is continuing to go on. Imagine that nationally.
Yeah.
Because that's what you would get.
And it has its own fears, right? People think they're catching all kinds of diseases from them.
And, right. And you do get, you know, forest fire issues and things like that. I mean, so I think, you know, positing transmission lines is not something one should do. You should think about it a little more carefully too.
One of the big selling points on nuclear is land use, because wind, solar, hydro, transmission lines, right? And that becomes an increasing problem with penetration, right? As you start using up the best land, it becomes more and more a problem as you try to do those things without nuclear.
I mean, distributed power through small nuclear, that is advantageous for a lot of reasons.
And here's the other big argument, I thought, is just that it can ramp up real quickly. And so if we really feel it's the emergency we say it is, we can do something quickly if we need to. And it has in the past done that.
A good point. It was very telling.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let me just speak up for a moment as the transmission guy. When I redo my HVDC presentation and paper, I will respond to all of your points, Betty, about transmission and why there are good solutions that answer all those questions.
I think it'd be great if there were. I just don't see it playing out so far.
Just a comment on process here, Ed. I'm hearing that you sent Paul a red line version of the document. What we've been doing, you know, is, you know, going into suggestion mode, and is there?
I tried to do that, and some reason I couldn't do it on the version I had, but maybe I just didn't know how.
Okay, I mean, it would, I mean, it just as the mechanism we use would, so everybody can see what your comments would be if you have it.
Maybe he doesn't have privileges.
If you can, you should. I'll double check, but
I run into a problem with different accounts. And so I get some of them I can edit and some of them I can't, and I have to switch around to make sure I'm in the right account.
In response to Charlie's comment on intermittency, which I term as variable because it's given the batteries, it becomes more a variable issue than an intermittency issue. The California did a study and supposed it had enough solar and wind to take care of the energy needs of California, but then came up with the conclusion that 10% of the time that wouldn't even suffice. So they still needed some baseline predictable source of energy that wasn't dependent upon wind and solar. But batteries may end up, or some type of storage may end up resolving that. I think that's a developing stage.
I mean, California has the added risk of when they have their giant fires, they can lose all their solar.
Right.
Right. So, yeah.
Did anybody see the comment I left on another document? And maybe it seemed kooky, but still it does trouble me about these solar, what do they call those? They're not solar flares, but these major solar events.
Yeah, solar flares. Yeah, well, and wiping out the whole grid.
Right. And so I wonder if
That's
solar
real.
panels are like big antennas that are just ripe for like total destruction. And whether there are any regulations or anything to be put in place to make them more resilient. Because if we're putting all our eggs in these baskets and we have no power that we can actually generate, because we're relying totally on storage,
Right.
we could be in for, it could be a civilization threatening event.
There's actually another problem with solar. It's actually increasing absorption. So you're lowering the albedo with solar.
Yeah.
Right? So at large scale, I don't know if that becomes an important effect.
In footnote 2 on the open letter, I would put in the text what the date is. It's November 3, 2015, just so people know. That I immediately had that question. I looked it up. And
the date of what? The date of what?
It's to quote an open letter dated November 3.
Then. Okay.
I put that right in the text so people don't have to think about what the date is.
Okay.
It's in the site that you have, but it's not everyone realizes that.
So I just do that right now, right here. And put it with
put it in the main text.
For the main text.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, I can just make a note to do that.
Right.
November 3rd, when?
2013.
2013.
You just need the year there.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's true. Okay.
If it were January, we might need the date, but otherwise, never mind.
Yeah.
Okay. I can see if that flows okay or not. So terrorism. I tried to address terrorism more thoroughly later. I don't know if you feel it got addressed enough, but we can look at it then. All right, Larry. Oh yeah. So do people feel these all should be uncapitalized? I mean, to my mind, I like them capitalized, but
Generally, ordinary non-proper noun entities are not capitalized, including names of elements.
well, to me, elements are names. So I don't know. I view them as proper. I've always thought of elements as proper, or it depends on how it's used, right? Meaning I could see carbon one way and the other way, depending on how the word is used. But right, before we get to the elements, just the names of the technologies, are those not to be capitalized? Does everyone think Larry's right, or we don't know? I can check.
Yeah, I don't really have a horse in this one.
Okay. For me, I don't know, to me, it's clearer when they're capitalized, but
yeah, I probably would have capitalized myself, but then
I can look and see how
I would have bowed
I'll look at usage.
to Larry's. Yeah, Larry usually knows how to.
Yeah, I'll see how often it's done by other people and what other people's usage is, and I'll go by that. That sound fair?
See what the MIT people do. They're involved in that.
Yeah, okay, that sounds fair. So the same issue with advanced nuclear. To me, I prefer that being
Just a
capitalized.
note in that paragraph you're going through now that starts in the following chapters. I wonder to what extent the success or not of the proposal to release the radioactive water from Fukushima will affect overall the disposal issue. They're trying to put in millions of barrels, I don't know how many barrels of radioactive water into the ocean.
Yeah, but from my understanding, it's barely above background. It's not, I mean, it sounds awful, but if you really think about what's actually being done, it's really nothing.
Now, that's only one reactor, and let's suppose they set a precedent, all of a sudden people start to put in.
Well, people used to actually. That was the original way of disposal. Everyone just dumped everything into the sea, and then the UN said no.
That's why you want to keep the coal plants burning so you can keep your lights on. So that was his usual way of doing things too. We're getting away from that also.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that actually dumping into the sea was ever bad. I mean, there's lots of uranium in the water, and what you're adding is a very small fraction, and things get dispersed in the ocean. That I'm not sure that ocean dumping wasn't really the best way, and that we've made a mistake by banning it. But anyway, I could maybe address the Fukushima, since that's in the news and people are aware of it, and actually look at the numbers. But
then you'd have a nice comparison with Florida and what they've been dumping into Tampa Bay.
Oh, really? What have they been dumping into Tampa Bay?
All the wastewater from other mining and processing that they've had in these sort of lifelong pools that have suddenly begun to leak.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, there's I thought that was in Carolina. Isn't there like a giant pool of? Is that Florida? Maybe it was Florida. I thought there was in Carolina. There was something.
Tampa. It was Tampa Bay.
I think they were evaporation ponds, but they were getting more water than evaporation.
Okay. And they're about to overflow the dikes, right?
Well, no, it cracked.
The dam was failing.
Maybe we're talking about two different things. I think I was talking about, I think it was related to a coal mine, and it was where they just dumped it all in the sludge, and that was starting to overflow. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I could do that. Bring up the Tampa Bay. So I love the photo. So let's see. Subs. Yeah. I don't know.
Question on the siting flexibility. Is the MIT plant electric generating, or is it treat a research reactor?
It's a research reactor.
Okay,
I mean, it generates, I think.
You speak of it as generating electricity, I think. There. That's
do I?
Yeah, that's the context in which it's using. So.
Yeah, nuclear plants, nuclear reactors. That might be better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that sits in the middle of Raleigh, North Carolina, too.
And one in the middle of the Cornell campus that I used to work at Friga up there. So.
Yeah, well, I was surprised to see there was one at WPI.
So Paul, I was surprised when I saw under the Arctic ice sheet until I realized it probably meant subs.
Yeah, I did mean subs. Is that worth saying?
I thought you should say under the Arctic ice sheet parens in submarines, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people might think
that's an actual reactor built under there. Okay.
Yeah.
They're going to alarm the Russians. Be careful.
Maybe you say they operate illegally under the Arctic ice sheet.
I don't know that it's illegal.
I don't know either. I just picked up.
Well, actually, I mean, the Russians have built a floating one, right? It's in operation now, I believe.
What makes you think there still is an ice sheet?
Yeah, well, that's true. while it lasts. The Arctic ice sheet of long ago.
You got the Senate starting solar and wind. Has anyone done the calculation if you put a rooftop solar on as many buildings as there are available along with battery storage? Doesn't that have a big impact on what we need in terms of other distributed energy resources?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a reference to that. I mean, the NREL did a study that was referenced in the 2050 roadmap that the administration published. And their conclusion was that if you took advantage of all of the potential rooftop solar on buildings, you would still be, in terms of our need for or demand for electricity in mid-century, it would, be on the order of, 10 to 15%.
About the same impact as a nature-based solution.
About the same impact as a nature-based, and that's where the discussion about using open space and what sort of open space, because rooftop solar in and of, by itself isn't sufficient.
I know in Slovakia several years ago, when they started to clear forests to put in solar in the countryside, there was a big objection to that, and they started to look at all the city rooftops and moved a lot of the solar there. So it's politically it's an issue.
Yeah,
clearly.
Yes, it's going on right now in southeastern Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And rooftop solar then, of course, conflicts with green roofs.
Not necessarily, because there is a solution that says if you have rooftop solar, you can actually grow different types of plants up there,
Oh,
and you keep it cooler. So there's a whole,
you could do both.
you do both,
Mhm.
and you can grow under solar in a field too. Apparently, you grow plants.
So we're at 2:30. Do you want to go on for another 15 minutes, or
I have to go. So
Yeah.
I think I've had enough for
I have to
today.
go too.
you have to go too? Okay.
Failing fast.
I can just wrap up real fast. No, okay.
All right. So what did we say? So for next week, we would spend the first half hour on Amy's and Larry's spreadsheet and I guess, for want of a better word, theory of change. And then the second hour, continuing with this, continuing with the nuclear paper.
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
In terms of contents, that just comes right before everything else. Is that the
What?
format? Yeah,
What?
adding a table of contents.
Oh, I would
It's
know.
like-
I would typically, at least what I do is after the title of the paper would
After
come
the
the
title.
table of contents.
Okay.
And if you have any question about how to insert it or how to, I can work with you there, Paul.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording and
Send out a link so Amy and Phil can
yeah.